Over the last few years, I built a few TIG finger displays out of aluminum. I'd like to get my TIG finger in more local welding supply stores. Also went to some trade shows. So my first attempt was made out of 120 thousandths thick, just smooth 6061 T6. I don't have a press brake, so all of them are outside corner welds. I did find, however, that 200 Hertz on this prime weld made for a really nice controllable arc on those outside corners. And of course, if I'm going to make a video about a TIG finger holder, I'm going to use a TIG finger to weld it and prop right next to a weld like this and scoot along nice and easy. 200 Hertz seemed to really focus that arc, keep it from fanning out too much without being too loud and noisy. I'm dragging that TIG finger along the whole joint here. If you've got to do a long outside corner and you don't want to stop, don't want to have tie-ins, you don't want your knuckles to start screaming midway, you don't want to take the time to set up some elaborate propping mechanism or glide or anything like that, TIG finger glides along nice and you put it back in your pocket when you don't need it. Now I put this butt weld on here just for looks, just to hopefully draw an eyeball or two if it was in a store. But I think it's instructive watching this little butt weld, watching that puddle sink. I want to show this again here. Let me replay it. Even though I'm moving along at a fairly good clip here, I think you can see in between dabs, that puddle just actually drops a little bit. It sinks, and that's the indicator that you're getting full penetration all the way through the backside. So I took that to a local welding supply store and they said you probably should make that a little bit smaller. So I ordered some 063 tread plate. And so I get a lot of questions about tacking thin aluminum, and so I really focused on the technique for putting small tack welds on thin aluminum. You'll see. In order to get some small tacks on an outside corner joint on fairly thin aluminum, I use a tapered point and I set the AC frequency to 200 Hertz. Tapered point just about like I would use on carbon steel or stainless steel, not quite as tapered, but a tapered point helps you get a crisp start. Let's go over that in half speed here. Okay, I light up. Once those corners start to puddle, I'm watching it really closely. And if they don't join, I don't ram the pedal down. I just stab some filler metal in there and make them join. That way heat conducts evenly then once you have them joined, and you can kind of coax that metal around a little bit. I'll take another look at that from another angle. Here, nice and close up. You can also use that tread, those tread bumps for filler sometimes, and kind of wash it in. And that way it won't leave such a hump when you go over it. You'd like for your tack welds to be just a little bit smaller than the final weld. That's why I'm using 1/16 wire for the tack welds, and then I'll come back over it with 332. You're going to have some irregularities when you weld tread plate every time you hit one of those tread bumps, but the goal is to kind of minimize them and smooth them out as much as possible. I made sure there was a butt weld on this piece too, just again to try to draw some eyeballs. If this was going to be set up in a welding supply store at a counter, you know how welders like to inspect every weld they see. So I thought I'd put one butt weld there just to draw their eyeball toward the TIG fingers and maybe start a conversation. I didn't really plan ahead on this one. I didn't realize the TIG fingers would be hiding that weld. The last one was simply running beads around the edge of a plate for a placard. I'm still sticking with the concept that a weld bead will draw a welder's eye to whatever it is it's on. So before I got started here, I ran 2 or 3 different rods. Wanted to see which rod made the best looking bead. Strictly for appearance, strictly cosmetic, and 5356 seemed to be as good as any or better, so I kind of stuck with that. You can see the ones next to that, you really can't tell much difference. I ran a bead with 4043, 4943, and 5356, and when I looked at them at the end, I just honestly would be hard pressed to tell the difference. And I don't think you can even tell the difference while I'm welding with them here. Usually 5356 will give a little green tint. I didn't really notice much in this case, so I don't know. Those 3 beads look pretty much the same to me. What I did discover was 150 Hertz really helped control that bead right next to the edge. It helped me just barely wick it over to the corner and not roll it over a lot. And that's a benefit. It's kind of like I use high-speed pulse on DC to do the same thing, but on AC, just high frequency AC seems to have a similar effect. It's just another tool in the tool belt. Could have done the same thing at most any frequency, it just made it a little bit easier. Let's take another close-up look at arc shots of that 150 Hertz. You can see some funky stuff going on that tapered electrode. There's a way around that, and it usually involves doing a little bit of polishing to get that ridge off of there, but it doesn't seem to be hurting anything. It's just not necessarily helping either. We'll go over that in a future video. A few additional steps on the tapered tip to make it smooth the arc out a little bit. Here's that number 7 Pro clear cup. It lit things up really well for us so we could see everything. I found these pulse settings to be pretty helpful too for running a bead right next to the edge. 1 pulse a second, background on 33%, and then the pulse width or pulse duty on 50%. You could use a lot of different settings here, but these are a really good starting point. And if you're having trouble establishing a good even rhythm feeding wire, this is a way to train yourself to do that. But all I'm doing here is running a Cosmetic bead right next to that edge. It did a good job, but it was just kind of slow. There's the placard affixed to the top of one of these rotating displays. We've got these in a few stores. I'd like to have them in more. The rest of this video is very much a commercial for my TIG finger product. TIG welding requires a steady hand, and you don't always have a place to prop that's convenient. But if you've got a TIG finger in your pocket, you've got a prop in your pocket. You can prop right next to the weld, right on the hot metal. You can hang in there for a really long time without ever even feeling any heat. That lets you focus on making a good weld instead of how bad your fingers are burning. Maybe you can relate to this. I know I can. I've hung in there too long when things are going well, trying to finish a weld and not make an extra tie-in to make the weld looking good, and I wind up with a bad burn on my knuckle or whatever finger I'm propping on just because I didn't want to stop. I don't wear a TIG finger for every single job I do, but it gives me a lot of options. Some welds get really hot really quick, like aluminum. If you know, you know. Whether you're up overhead, out of position, or on the bench, it's going to help you hold a steady hand, especially on small bore pipe. I walk the cup when I can, but there's times when you can't. There's stuff in the way. With a TIG finger in your pocket, you can freehand and still be steady, even on preheated pipe. Imagine trying to prop on a 5F aluminum test like this without a TIG finger, just with your bare glove. After ½ inch, it would be so hot you wouldn't be able to do it. With a TIG finger, you can make the whole run, not ever get hot. If you've got a 6G pipe test in your future, you'd like to have a TIG finger in your pocket. There are certain root pass techniques that work better without any side-to-side motion, and that happens easier with a TIG finger than it does walking the cup. Just another option. On long runs of aluminum, you can drag that TIG finger right next to the weld. Your fingers will never get hot, and you can be steady and smooth. TIG finger comes in a regular size as well as an XL size for people with big fingers, or you can slip 2 fingers in it for added protection on those really hot jobs. Made in the USA by friends and family, made from material made in the USA.